Hello, and welcome back to the use and abuse of Laura Endicott. This is chapter 6, where Laura presents the second set of letters that she has exchanged with her beau, Philip Rossiter. Cambridge, 15th of February, 1866. My dearest Rossi, by now I hesitate to think what you must feel about me and the condition I have placed myself, and yet our faith in one another has been unexpectedly rewarded, as you know. And I have kept you apprised of the shocking series of incidents that have befallen Arlemont and its dubious denizens, and I do include myself in that ever-abbreviating list. It does feel, however, that with the master's suicide we have entered a phase of relative calm. I am yet expectant, as if anticipating the next crisis. But of course when one lives through consecutive drama upon drama, one becomes inured to the sense that there can be nothing else. All of us had thought, my love, that with the departure of both Sir Hugh and, in a very different and still living manner, that of Inspector Mudge and his trusty adjutant, Sergeant Phipps, that the household might thus gain some relief. Just 2 days ago, though, here they both were at the front entrance to the great house, looking concerned, and I dare say suspicious. At this juncture Hargreaves called for me. He later confessed that though the both of us were utterly innocent of Sir Hugh's death, he had felt as if he had already been hung for it, and the four just as it occurred. Miss Endicott, we meet again. I fear I must prevail upon the both of you to entertain our latest, was how the inspector opened. Have you some new intelligence? I asked, rather banally. Indeed we do, Miss Endicott, but it is, if you will forgive me, negative intelligence. To this both Hargreaves and I must have given the fellow a bit of a blank stare, for after a pause wherein he scrutinized our faces, he continued. The police surgeon has performed an autopsy, you understand. It has confirmed the cause of death, but it has also revealed that such a cause is itself absent from the body, specifically, of course, its head. Now I was lost. Hargreaves to the rescue, a role that he can perform, my dearest darling boy, but not at the level of which you yourself can, as it seemed that he was prescient for a moment. We did not examine Sir Hugh too closely. Quite so, yes, utterly understandable, but I suppose you have by now cleaned the room. We did not clean the room, sir, but only the bed linen and pillows, some of which had simply to be discarded. Ah, that is of the greatest import at this juncture. You see, not to make a riddle of a riddle, which would be contrary to my vocation, we have secured no bullet. Yes, it was not to be found inside the head, and our surgeon only noted that there was another hole where such a projectile must have exited the newly deceased. Phipps and I thus have every hope of recovering this important, need I say, vital piece of evidence. Good Lord, we did not encounter any such thing ourselves, did we, Miss Endicott? I should certainly have recalled it, since I've never actually seen a bullet, let alone handled one. That is quite expected, Miss Endicott, for someone in your position and of your sex, excuse me. Nevertheless, having confided in you the chief reason for our return, I now have to remind the both of you that we are placed ourselves in a position of trust. I assure you, sir, that we have discovered no bullet, Hargreaves risked reiterating. Indeed, as Sir Hugh took his own life, what profit would there be for anyone to hide such evidence? I too rapidly added, chastising myself for doing so. In return, I received a vexed look from the inspector. Oh, Rossi, my one love, I do declare that your winsome girl still has not only her girlish moments, which you so enjoy and are entertained by, but also her childish ones. I do believe the inspector might have considered this one the latter. Quite so. Yes, Miss Endicott, that would certainly be the case if Sir Hugh did indeed take his own life, but I, for one, am not yet convinced of this. Not fully. Your surgeon and the county physician? Oh, yes, the both of them, upon further examination, of course, the latter being present before the room was altered by your partial cleaning thereof, are both convinced. But they are not the final word upon such matters. Understood, sir, of course. Shall we proceed apace, then? Hargreaves looked aggrieved at having to revisit any of this, and that Rossi made sense to me as our quartet of mismatched players trundled ourselves up the main staircase and down the lengthy panelled corridor in which so much subterfuge over the centuries must have taken place. Perhaps this latest series of scandalous doings was, after all, merely a footnote to all the rest of it. Upon arriving at the late Sir Hugh's rooms, We entered, and Phipps began an immediate and most assiduous search of every square inch of the room. For his part, his superior took out a large circular magnifying lens, of the kind we girls had ourselves utilized in science classes at Hilliard's of dreaded memory, only a fair size larger, and presumably thus more powerful. With it he scanned the ledges, the marquette joints, the ceiling and its glowering inset squares, the bedposts spinning and swirling their way up into a tapestry of canopy. Then he took his stick and poked that very appurtenance, no doubt hoping to shake something loose. But there was nothing, Rossi, nothing at all. No matter where they sought, their quarry was ahead of them. I did not feel it was our place to look at all, for perhaps we might well find the bullet and squirrel it away. But Hargreaves decided to work in tandem with the sergeant, and Phipps appeared grateful. Between the two of them, they were actually able to move the entire bed frame, which I would reckon had not been so moved in many decades, many more, perhaps more. But all of this, taking the better part of 2 hours, produced absolutely no score. I take it there are no secret passages. In a house as old as this, I am told it is plausible that even if none were part of the original build, some might have been later installed. Indeed, sir, yes, we do know of one such passageway, presumably built during the Second Civil War. Alas, it does not lead to these rooms, and indeed, to my complete knowledge of this property, never touches even the wing that they sit in, and thus we within them. Hargreaves would of course know of such secrets. I marveled at him even so, as well as being suddenly possessed of some of those tingles up and down one's spine, which, to be mischievous for a moment, my love, only have elsewise overtaken me, in anticipation of your presence, and what is about to occur within it. I can certainly take you through and along this singular passage, sir. I would like to see it, in any case, yes. The inspector could not hide his disappointment. For if it is surely cliché, Rossi, that a crime is committed and there remains some mystery lingering in its vicinity, an old great house, a secret passage, and the like, and if all this is but the stuff of a mediocre octavo novel, when one is confronted by some version of it in reality, there is nevertheless just as real a thrill to be imparted. And so I thrilled now, as if I were but 12, as Hargreaves led us back down the stairs and into the vast library where I have spent so many pleasant hours. The library of Orlemont has seemed to me to be a refuge, not only for the mind, but more deeply for the soul. Within its sanctity, unbridled by any credo and set loose from any crucis, I have rediscovered myself through a journey of bright discourse and dialogue. It is a place where the dead live again and again through the limpid luxury of their combined legacies. Yet it was precisely here that there endured some mystery, though, as evidenced by the inspector's expression, one unrelated to the case at hand. It is accessed by pressing in upon this mantel, just so, Hargreaves demonstrated. There was a sharp snick, and then one of the floor-to-ceiling bookcases edged itself out from what appeared to be merely wall. The next operation required Phipps and he to pull out the shelving without spilling its rare volumes all over the floor, and a passage was indeed revealed. We entered it, one after the other, only to breathe in a musty odor, wipe the cobwebs from our hair and hands, and sneeze at the accumulated dust. How long since anyone has used this? Was the inspector's obvious query. I dare say I do not know. The last time I myself was through here was perhaps a year ago or more. I do clean it out ever so often, but it is an endless task, and as this is not a space wherein any useful vehicle of transportation be found, I tend to let it go. Indeed, sir, I was only reminded of its existence when you yourself just asked after such things. Otherwise, for me, it is simply part of the house. All of that is expected, I suppose, Mr. Hargreaves, but none the less singularly unhelpful. The inspector was clearly nettled, and must be wondering, as was I, though I remained taken up with the moment and the idea of secret passages in general, silly thing that I can be, how on earth he was going to resolve this latest impasse. We then came up against a sharply ascending series of steps which, at their top, presented to us a blank barrier of a wall. This time, however, the means of egress were obvious. Under the light of the manager's lantern, a simple latch and associated bolt could be seen. When lifted and pushed out, as Hargreaves effected, I found myself stepping into the master's study, 2 floors above the library and near the opposite end of the structure, as were Sir Hugh's private rooms. This room is, I take it, at some distance from the bedchamber in question. Very much so, sir. I am sorry, but this represents the extent of my knowledge of the history of Orlemont, as it were, for it is, if you will, sir, the least known part thereof. Understood. Phipps, my man? Either there does exist a second passage, similar in construction to the one we have just traversed, and Mr. Hargreaves is unaware of it, or we now have indirect evidence of either a potential murdered man himself, or an accessory to him, or, indeed, either or all of the foregoing. The sergeant was clearly a sharp-witted and trusted assistant. The inspector had not only called upon him to offer his thoughts, but also, given the response, had expected some sort of summa of the facts at hand and their implications. You will be proud of me, my love, that I was able to follow the fellow's logic, and in its sequence. So then, you are arguing that since there must have been a bullet, and since none can presently be found, some unknown must have recovered it, perhaps straight after the event itself, I responded brightly, but avoiding the manner of a schoolgirl under interrogation. Such an interlocution, Rossi, my beautiful and liberated boy, I witnessed too many a time at Hilliard's to ever repeat even a semblance of such. Very good, Miss Endicott. Yes, it is possible, of course, given that yourself and Mr. Hargrave here took in excess of 15 minutes to open the locked door of the room, that someone could have searched its premises before ever you attained them, and then hid in the bath, which neither of you, may I remind you, investigated at the crucial time, making their no doubt hurried yet silent exit, when the both of you, may I remind you again, departed the scene in your incipient quest for aid. One could hardly expect Miss Endicott to remain on guard, sir, and I bear the entire responsibility to initiating the official proceedings, as one could also not expect our governess to do so. The first point I admit to, Mr. Hargreaves, but not the second. Oh, dear. Hargreaves looked a tad crestfallen at this point, my darling, as you might well expect, and yet a more chivalrous gent in a crisis I have never met. I say this because I never wish the two of us to be in such a crisis as would claim a sacrifice upon your being my one love. So for a moment I resented both the words and the implication of the inspector. I sought to intervene. I, for one, was most agitated at our grim discovery. Now, it would be some veteran and sure criminal, would it not, who counted upon such an abreaction before the fact, and thus sequestered himself in the bath, where he must imagine that he would surely be discovered in any case, in order only to escape later on by chance. I take your points, Miss Endicott, but what alternative do we presently have? The inspector was not quite surly. He did give me a sharp look, but I bore it up, as I was never cowed by such at school, even from the headmistress, perhaps because I knew that, at least in my case, such looks were all bark, with no bite, as it were. My contemporary clear conscience was thus the equivalent of Hilliard's informal charity, and thus I bore it up, and the well. Now Phipps interjected. I do think that Miss Endicott's appraisal is correct, sir. If I myself had successfully murdered the victim, the very last thing I would do would be to hide in an anteroom which presents no cover at all, and no door, after locking the main door, and thence hope any passing inquiry would simply go its merry way. May I ask how long it took, not to open the door, but to actually attain the front of the door in the first place? Ah, now that was truly excellent. For this insight I gave Phipps a bright smile, to which he inordinately blushed, the poor fellow. Well, sir, it took us perhaps 5 minutes or more, Miss Endicott. I recall, dear Mr. Hargreaves, that you and I were awakened at the same moment. I take this must be true, by definition. It was several moments before you arrived at my door, and then several minutes before we made even the corridor. I threw on something or other and lit my candle, which was already guttering. Then I would suggest, Inspector, sir, that this chain of events presented ample time for any possible assailant to make an escape. Indeed, rather a leisurely one, Phipps concluded. Surely such a point is moot, Sergeant, for the door was locked, and from the inside, upon their arrival, and was only left open, and by them upon their return. Phipps looked downcast, yet I had myself forgotten that unassailable fact. Barring a complete conspiracy of insiders, as it were, there would have been no possible way for an intruder to let himself out, and then turn and actually lock the door from the outside, using the same means by which we ourselves had unlocked it. Our painstaking efforts had at least shown the inspector that this kind of decoy maneuver was a patent impossibility. Thus it was clear that Phipps's superior was not entirely satisfied, yet because it was his own assistant who had picked up my initial resistance, he said nothing further, sighed, and raised his brows at Phipps. There was now a pause, reflective of the rather Gordian puzzle with which all of us had been presented. Then, with a sudden deliberation, the inspector had us back at it, in Sir Hugh's rooms a second time over, and a second time. There was all of nothing, my precious love, nothing. I observed Inspector Mudge digging his blunt fingernails into what he imagined were creases or joins in the panelling, but to no avail. I feel I am making a fool of myself at this juncture, he at one moment panted out. For his part, Phipps was examining the woodwork, the head of the massive bed, and even now he and Hargreaves lifted the mattress aloft, with your very own pushing herself underneath and feeling round hither and thither, and all of this came to no head at all. I can find no trace of the bullet, and by that I literally mean no abrasion, scratch, dent, or contusion that, after exiting from the deceased man's head, would have been caused by an impact, Phipps duly reported. The inspector chuffed. Could there have been a ricochet? I suggested. Indeed, miss, and this is precisely why I have scoured unlikely planes, at odd angles, from where the bullet must have travelled immediately upon exiting. even if there had been a ricochet, which in itself is quite possible, of course, there would have been a first strike, as it were, a first place whereupon the projectile impacted. I see. No, of course. And yet there is nothing of the kind. Nothing at all of any sort, Phipps confirmed. I gave him a look of sympathy, and his face colored again as he looked to his toes. Oh, Rossi, how ludicrous the whole thing was, and mainly due to my presence, I fear. For in what serious song does one expect to hear the sunny note of spring and birds, and in what dirge would the nightingale herself sing? For that was how Phipps, at least, beheld me, for he was not immune to the presence which you, sweet perfect man, have fully fallen for. Was it the habit of Sir Hugh to keep his brace of pistols loaded in their case? The inspector had altered course, apparently, and directed this over to the manager. I had warned him to be cautious, but he always explained that he should be able and ready to, in a moment, defend his household and his family. I respected such druthers, I dare say, and became accustomed to cleaning the other firearms with which the house is furnished, though none of them are kept loaded. Well, on our initial visit here, you did in fact show me the armory. Have you noticed any changes in its accoutrement in between your sharing it with me now some days ago, I do declare, and today? I confess I have not looked at it, or them, in the interim, sir. I should like to avail myself thereof one more time, if you don't mind. Not at all, sir. I shall lead. The four of us came back downstairs, and I was presently left alone with Phipps, who was clearly flustered at such a condition. Mr. Phipps, why on earth a policeman's career? I said this with compassion. Oh, Miss Endicott, well, I confess to having a rather boyish mind, if you will. I was always risking a hiding in school for it, for I never left what the masters called well enough alone, shall we say. A kindred spirit, then, my dear fellow. I fervently hope that a lady such as herself suffered no ill because of it. Not I, sir. I led a charmed existence as a schoolgirl, but I was, to my knowledge, the only such girl at that particular establishment. I dare say, Phipps faltered out. He was by now utterly admiring of me, dear Rossi, but have no fear. The poor sergeant would never dare even look in my direction. Supposedly I have such an effect over young men. Is it not the devil's due, however, that I could affect no such adoration on the part of Sir Hugh, now forever fallen? And yet this I take to have been a boon of a long-lost providence, for it saved me the shame of both an unwanted intimacy, even though not an uncalled-for one, again shame, and the both of us any sense that one of us had been disloyal, in that most tenebrous way. Even so, I regret it still, not because of you and I together, of course, but because I could in fact do nothing to present an alternative to a father's desires for his elder daughter. That is why it remains, at least in part, the work of a devil, as well as that of a god. Well, Mr. Hargreaves, I am as yet dissatisfied, though I admit I have much less to stanch in such a sense. Phipps, any final thoughts? Unless we can prove a third party, as it were, we may have to give it up. The hunting pistol had been fired, a bullet discharged. There was but one wound upon the body, the bullet passing through. We have not recovered said projectile, but by related facts it must match the weapon so used. If someone else had in fact used the weapon, afterward placing it in the grip of Sir Hugh's left hand with its barrel configured in the proper direction to maintain such a theatre, it must have been from no more a distance than it would have been had Sir Hugh himself fired it, and that, in turn, also argues against a third party. Somewhat against Phipps, somewhat, for an intruder could have leant over the bed and shot him whilst he remained asleep. I do not think that possible, sir, for, as I noted before, Sir Hugh was an inveterately light sleeper, put in Hargreaves. The inspector was now shaking his head in annoyance. Yes, so you did. Even so, Phipps. On my side, we do yet have both the time and means for an admittedly still hypothetical attacker to have himself recovered the bullet and exited the house well before Mr. Hargreaves and Miss Endicott returned to the scene. That said, when you had first arrived, you found the door locked from the inside. Yes. Oh! I expostulated. Something had blustered its way into my semi-consciousness, my darling Rossi, something both so dark and devious that at first all I could do was silently shriek at it. The inspector gave me a quizzical look. Only that there could be no one left inside to indeed lock the door. Quite so, Miss Endicott. No doubt the inspector thought me a dimwit at this moment, but my mind was too distracted to care for Rossi, my love. I had actually had another idea entirely, and upon the parting of the official forces, I immediately began my own investigation thereof. And so, my darling Rossi, ever missed and yet ever anticipated, here is the second part of this missil's narrative, and I shall tell it you once again as it occurred, but this time myself being the only character in the scene. My first step was to return once again to Sir Hugh's bedchamber, whereupon I extracted the second pistol from its case. Its mate was, of course, still sequestered back at the police quarters in town. You will recall in a previous letter how I had described the blemishing effect of some object that the young Olivia ported with her when we encountered one another beneath the ridge, in the forest adjacent to the estate gardens, though well out of sight thereof. And of course you, being a brilliant young man, a gentleman and a scholar, and indeed a lover and enchanter, have already guessed at my gambit. To vouchsafe my altogether analogic yet empirical hypothesis, I made for Olivia's rooms, knowing that she would be either abroad on the grounds, as was her wont from time to time, or herself in the library, hopefully preparing the lessons I had that morning presented to she and her sister. I stole into her bedchamber and thence into her armoires, one after another, until I found the exact pea-coat she had been wearing in the forest. I then pushed the pistol into one of its outside pockets, and then the corresponding one interior to the vestment. Alas, my dear Rossi, alas! Not only did the weapon not fit into either, it protruded to such an extent that, had I observed it itself, whence in the girl's presence, I certainly would have been able to identify it exactly as it was. I stood there overlong, bearing the risk of being discovered. I had no truck with any governess rummaging through her charge's personal effects, or indeed even a parent, since I well know how precious privacy is for all youth. I stood there even so, guilty as a trespasser, but as well guilty of being deluded in my investigation proper. Presently I gave it up, vexed, as you might well imagine. Replacing the pistol in its case, I once again stood silently, mulling it over. I could come to no satisfactory conclusion, and you may think me as heartless and as indeed as scheming as I was suspicious Miss Olivia had been. Yet it was not such a breadth to span as imagining that she herself had murdered her father in defence of her older sister, as I might well have myself done in the same conditions. No, this was not about judging her, but indeed, shame on me perhaps, protecting her, in case the inspector had some cosmic coruscation, and so placed Olivia in the mental dock. But there was one more aspect to the entire visitation by the officials that had twigged me. I could not put my finger upon it, but it had something to do with Phipps's comment regarding the distance across which the bullet had supposedly traveled. Though his superior had brushed this off, the suggestion that an intruder could have leant over the bed and fired point blank seemed to hold within it the key to the entire affair. No doubt, Rossi, my love, you have formulated your own theory, and I am all in agitation to read of it. But for now I shall send these words to you by all of the might and flight of Hermes, and shall thence hope for as speedy a reply as you are able to yourself conjure in my direction. Your everlasting mate, Laurel. Here now is Philip's immediate reply to the above. Of course, we had in the preceding interim sent a number of other letters to one another, but I am only reproducing the key documents to ensure the narrative makes sense and moves apace. Paris, 20th February, 1866. My blessed Laurel, these weeks are like those recounted in the Gospels, surely, wherein the fate of the world is being played out, and my heroine, a goddess upon that same earth, compelled to compile her good works and deeds within the maelstrom of a shrouded human heart, its own excesses so luridly displayed before her stalwart soul and forward feet. In that you are always forward-looking, my one love, my best friend. Now, I feel I must demand that I come to Cambridge as soon as term ends here. Indeed, I am no longer as enamored with the Sorbonne, and so shall have some news of this upon our righteous reunion. That is a matter for our personal future, and the Lady Miss's invitation to you and I resonates in my head and heart, and indeed hourly so. It is an uncomfortable amalgam of base metal, in that how can such a pair such as us rusticate without an odd scandal in a stranger's great house, and that both unmarried, and even then once betrothed, and the most pure of gold, in that it shall be we, my love, the greatest pair of winged lovers the earth has seen since antiquity, an elixir so heady as to deny all scandal, and overtake all social decorum at once, but as well as heady to make them both of us drunk with impassioned ardor, embrace, union, and climax. Now, speaking of mischief, is this not as well a love letter to thee? Even so, Eros must stand back a pace, for your reportage, intimate and compelling as always, my love, has, as you suggested, demanded of me both questions and theories. You find yourself in a classic, if indeed somewhat cliché, mystery, the locked door of all things, the secret passage, but seemingly irrelevant, the possibility of an interloper's egress, as well as his recovering the means of his own deadly crime. Good heavens, my singular angel of light and love, your intemperate and courageous being is yet being tested anon. For my part, I have both a question and a theory, as you requested. Here is the question. Is it possible that, upon hearing Hargreaves' report of the noise in the night, that you accepted this as the source of your own awakening, when in fact it was not such a source, and rather mere coincidence, as well as the power of suggestion, that made you accept it? If this were so, my darling, and I accuse you of no self-delusion, you understand, only the lot of every human being who is awakened in such a patent half-stupor, would it not then be possible that the manager did himself murder his master? He could have performed such a deed, recovered his projectile, placed the weapon in the dead man's palm, and, with haste, made for your room, reporting the disturbance exactly as he then did. Now, you will no doubt resist this idea, given what you have told me of the manager's utter loyalty and indeed old-fashioned fealty to Sir Hugh Mountford. But then again, if he imagined that same master have taken rightful umbrage at your predecessor and murdered her, as you have related you are sure he does imagine, could it not as well be the case that Sir Hugh's dallying with his elder daughter would have offended his trusted servant all the more? For on the one side we have a father enacting vengeance against a monster who has tortured his younger daughter, yet on the other we have that same father torturing, at least emotionally, the elder daughter. How can the harmony of such a duet be reconciled? In the mind of the manager, not being possessed of the facts of the first case, he must think that Sir Hugh is his own kind of monster, favouring the younger daughter unfairly, though belatedly. You see where I am heading with all of this, no doubt. And of course there is still the problem of the door being locked when you and Hargreaves arrived. And yet Hargreaves would be in his own mind disillusioned regarding the integrity and chivalry of his master, perhaps to the very extent of enacting what in his mind would be a righteous retribution against him, thereby saving the elder daughter from further molestations. And so here you have both my question and my theory in one go, as it were. And, my darling perfect Seraphim, even if you had been awakened by the same report that the manager claimed awakened he, having actually been at the scene of the murder, he might well have observed the immediate passage of the missing projectile, snatched it up, hurried on to your rooms in the same amount of time it would have taken him to dress, and approach your door in the manner you currently have presumed upon. In that time he could also have exacted, with the same kind of means that you and he opened the door, closing the door and locking it from the outside. Indeed, perhaps even more rapidly. So you see, my love, that my idea might have some merit. Its chief deficiency lies in Hargreaves' apparent loyalty, and that to a point whereby he allows himself to be deluded regarding Sir Hugh's character. Just so, my darling, just so. If such a man were to have been disillusioned thereof, what price might he exact? What penalty might he have levelled? I am not present, of course. I regret that every hour of every day, but I shall commend my amateur theory to your very much present intellect, and look forward to hearing of not only your furthermost exploits, but your critique of my idea. As it stands, however, the verdict of Sir Hugh taking his own life still appears to have the most weight behind it, no matter our painterly peregrinations. And there is one more thing to be said in its favour, which none of your wonderful cast has thus far spoken. Sir Hugh had stopped dallying with Miss Sarah for about a fortnight before his death. Why so? Yes, you felt your own invitation might have exposed him, at least in his own conscience, but I am sceptical of this, my darling, only because, as a man myself, I know other men and their ongoing desires. Any man whom I have met over my short life course would not have seen a contradiction between being with the younger woman and being with you, dearest, especially you, if you will forgive me. Perhaps this is a special bigotry of mine own. But a man's desires for beautiful women, young or yet younger, appears to me to be boundless, as it is in myth. So the question remains, at least to my sensibilities, why did Sir Hugh halt his intimate proceedings with his elder daughter? And you have reported that she herself regretted this stoppage, and yet she asked you to take her place, which you valiantly and altogether altruistically attempted to do. No. Now, when a man refuses congress with two beauties, I must suggest, as a fellow man, that there is something other about, something that is yet to come to light. Indeed, if the mystery prevails to the point at which I return, and thus begin sojourn with you at this harried and unhallowed estate, I shall be at your side, if you continue to resolve to solve it. Your utmost friend in need, always, Rossi. This time I had the self-discipline to only open and read Philip's portentous epistle upon returning to Armagh from Cambridge, but when I did read it I was transfixed, yet only for a moment. I took the liberty of sharing it entire with Hargreaves, and I could see as he read it through that his face blanched and his features waned. He looked over to me in askance, and then declared, "On my life, miss, it tweren't I. Oh, dear, I have regressed. It was not I. Oh, dear God, I dare say your fiancé is astute, for I have no evidence that can act contrary to his theory, none at all. Should I further incriminate myself along his lines by saying that I not only could have recovered the bullet, but also disposed of it entirely, and all this before I did awaken you?" Mr. Hargreaves, Lawrence, really, I do not for a moment believe that you committed murder, especially of Sir Hugh. But I dare say that you need to know the truth of things regarding his character. Now that you are apprised of such, would you then have at least considered such a deed? Oh, it was not my place to do so. Oh dear, now. No, now that I am rereading this passage here, I assume that. Good Lord, Miss Endicott! No, no, my dear Mr. Hargreaves, it was not I who murdered my predecessor, for she vanished months and months before ever I arrived, you will recall. No, of course, that was not my thought in the least. No, good God! I carried the body of that beastly person with Sir Hugh, and neither of us questioned either this or the casting it off the highest point of the ridge into the gully below. Who actually discovered the body in the schoolroom? Oh, it was Sir Hugh. But the governess was not, in fact, in the schoolroom, Miss Endicott, but rather in the gallery. The gallery? What would have been her business there? I am at a loss to explain it, but given the task at hand, it was not a question that made for any immediate consideration. No, of course, of course. Well, I suppose one could always approach Miss Olivia with the question. Horrible. Not at all to judge the poor young miss. She acted to my mind now in assured self-defense. But that I thought her father had acted for her. You will forgive both my loyalty and my bigotry, Miss Endicott. Nonsense, my dear friend. Of course anyone would have thought as much. One, that the father was culpable in not ridding the household of this woman before she took such liberties with his younger daughter, and two, that said daughter would generally be incapable of such an act, through her gentility, youthful age, and sex altogether. Yes, indeed, I am grateful to you. That said, Miss Olivia is no ordinary youth. To this I could only shake my head with both admiration and dismay. Yes, one could approach her with further questions, but the odds of getting a straight answer from that one were nebulous at best. That I had never let such stop me in the past was hardly a guarantor of future success, and so my ensuing gambit, prodded on by Philip's ingenious suggestion and quite logical drawing out thereof, had come to nothing. I was certain Hargreaves was not lying to me. He was not a man capable of such dishonesty, and the fact that he had willingly accepted what others should and would be just as honest as was he was proof positive of his own higher character. But in fact, such a proof had only vouchsafed his own standards and conduct therefrom, for all the rest of us, every last one of us, had placed ourselves at varying degrees of immoral distance from the manager's noble heart and well-compassed conscience, to the effect of creating a different kind of perfection in the world, a perfect tempest, whose temper had ended a string of related lives, and thenceforth seemed to threaten each of those remaining. Thank you for listening.